Hola, everybody. Welcome to the Chats with Yvonne podcast with me, your host, Yvonne Armenta, where I talk about public speaking con cultura. Today's episode is dedicated to exploring what it means to be a social introvert. I've had so many people say that I don't seem introverted because I'm high energy. And there are a lot of different factors to this, but one of them I think is probably because as an introvert, I've almost been forced to exist within spaces that reward extroversion. So that's probably a little bit of what that is. But as I've done more learning myself, I realize that even within the broad label of introvert, there are different types of introversion. So we're going to explore that today. And even if you yourself don't identify as an introvert, you probably have people in your life that do. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we exist. It's quite literally who we are. I'll briefly go through each one of those types of introversion, but spend most of the time talking through social introversion for the purposes of this episode. I'll look into the differences between a social introvert and ambivert because some of us may think they're the same thing after learning what it means to be a social introvert. By the way, right now, pause. Count how many times I say the word introvert in this episode. And I'll end with some insight into how to use your social introversion as a speaker and what it might say about you as a speaker in general if you do identify as one. I'll be citing my sources and thought pieces in the description of this episode if you'd like to check them out. So let's go ahead and get into it. I have always known that I'm an introvert. I knew it because when I was in las fiestas at the parties, I'd sit in the corner observing people dance with my little book or crocheting a scarf. And fun fact, this is actually how I learned to dance, which I love doing, by the way. I'd sit there the entire time watching people's feet and feeling the rhythm of the music through their feet. It's quite literally how I learned to dance, through observation. It's what I do best. And honestly, if I was to be asked to, I'd probably get up and dance. But no one really did because they thought I was a shy girl who would automatically say no. And that really is a theme in my life. I'm a natural observer, listener, turned public speaker. But what does it mean to be an introvert? Well, the concept of introversion versus extroversion was developed by psychiatrist Carl Jung in the early 1900s. And he said that the easiest way to spot an introvert, and I imagine to identify yourself as an introvert, is the way you need to recharge your social battery. Introverts go inward to recharge, and extroverts hang out with other people to recharge. An article by Introvert Dear, an award-winning community for introverts, says that the, quote, definition of an introvert is someone who prefers calm, minimally stimulating environments. Introverts tend to feel drained after socializing and regain their energy by spending time alone. This is largely because introverts' brains respond to dopamine differently than extroverts' brains. In other words, if you're an introvert, you were likely born that way. They say that being an introvert is determined by your genes, so you were probably born with it, but that it's also heavily influenced by our lived experiences. And all of the things that have shaped me might be the reasons I'm an introvert today. I definitely like to explore that in a different episode because, for example, I was bullied in elementary school, and I never told anyone until my brother joined my same school, and he had to tell my mom because I just wouldn't. I sort of just kept it to myself. I didn't want more attention than I felt I already had, and I thought I could deal with it on my own. Like, if I didn't tell anyone, eventually it would just go away. I could deal with it. I think I was probably in first, second, and third grade. So I was like, I'm about to graduate in 2 years, whatever. But my brother didn't let that slide. And I think I'll definitely share a podcast episode on the subject soon because that needs to be its own separate dissection and story time. I really do think that, yes, I am more naturally introverted, but a lot of our lived experiences have shaped the way, or a lot of my lived experiences, have shaped the way that I show up as an introvert. And while it's super important to recognize and define what an introvert is, something that introverts are not, according to the Introvert Dear article, is shy. So many people equate the two. And the article says that being shy means you get very nervous and self-conscious in social situations. Both introverts and extroverts can have this trait. Not all natural born extroverts run around chatting with strangers. Being introverted means socializing wears you out. You might not be nervous or shy at all. In fact, many introverts enjoy socializing, as long as it's meaningful. And some even get misidentified as ambiverts or extroverts. But since it will eventually tire you out, you probably avoid extra social time when you can. And before I move on, I want to quote them one more time. They say, quote, "Being an introvert is a gift. The world has a need for people who go deeper, think before they act, and look at things in new ways. The world has a place for people who value meaningful relationships over meaningless small talk. And the world is ready for thoughtful, contemplative people who bring calm and wisdom to a room." How beautiful is that? I think that to me beautifully describes the essence of being an introvert that for super long has been almost shunned in a lot of different places and not honored to its full capacity. And at the end of the day, labels can just be labels, but we can continue to study them to understand how we interact with ourselves and the rest of the world. And for the purposes of this podcast, understand how we show up as speakers. In 2011, psychologists Jennifer Grimes, Jonathan Cheek, and Julie Norum did some more research and divided introversion into 4 main types: social introvert, thinking introvert, anxious introvert, and restrained introvert. Let's define what those different types are, and then we'll really dive into social introversion. All right, let's start with the thinking introvert. People with high levels of thinking introversion don't share the aversion to social events people usually associate with introversion. Instead, this style of introversion just means a person who tends to be introspective, thoughtful, and self-reflective. You're imaginative and creative. You take your time thinking before you answer. Anxious introverts may seek out solitude because they feel awkward or self-conscious around people. This type of introvert shrinks away from people and settings that may further stimulate anxiety. And the anxious introvert can be highly avoidant and even seem rude, yet the turning inward behavior is simply a protective, sheltering defense mechanism. The restrained introvert, also called the inhibited introvert, tends to be more reserved and can have their guards up around others until they get to know them. Rather than seeming shy or avoidant, though, like the anxious introvert may seem, they simply come off as thoughtful and grounded. You take your time with what you do. You can't be rushed into action. And finally, the social introvert. Social introverts value solitude more than most people. They like being alone, but aren't opposed to the occasional gathering of close friends and family. Anthony Ferrari, a licensed psychotherapist, says a social introvert doesn't avoid crowds because of anxiety, but rather because of their preference. Where they feel the most comfortable and happy is either in complete solitude or in small groups in more subdued places. So we like people, just in a controlled environment and people that we know are familiar with, or more intimate settings. But as social introverts, we need that interaction, that human interaction. We crave it, but we'll still need 10 business days to recover. Now, what are the qualities of the social introvert? Like I said, we prefer tiny, intimate gatherings. We will happily go on a solo date or a vacation, which I absolutely love doing. Solo travel is some of my favorite travel. We require alone time to recharge, especially in a relationship. We will accept social invitations with little intention to show up. Though I will say, we also get FOMO. I talk about that a little bit later, but we get FOMO. So even if we accept a social invitation and we're like, no, I don't think I'll actually end up going because maybe we're also slightly people pleasers, and all of those things come and play a role and intersect into one, I likely will have FOMO and I'll be like, no, I want to show up because it looks so nice. Or I'm hanging out with my friends. I want to go because I don't want to miss out on that. A social introvert is someone who categorically prefers to spend time alone. They will go out of their way to ensure that they have the amount of time to themselves that they need. But if they do socialize, it will only be a very close-knit group of friends. And I'll give y'all an example. The other day I had family visit, and I obviously love having people over, and I love hanging out with people. I like doing things, especially when they are rarely here and it's our time to spend time together. But I think on the third day, I was just not feeling it. My social battery was completely gone. It was drained. And, in our familias, I didn't want to seem rude because I just wanted to be a part of everything. I didn't want people to think that it was them. I have learned that it is okay to lead with my introversion, to be like, hey, I need some time. I'm going to hang out and I need a couple hours of just time to myself. And that is okay. Because you know how in some families, especially in our cultura, it's rude to not say hi to every single person in the room. For example, like literally walk around to every single person. When you step into the room, if there are 50 people, you go to those 50 people and you shake their hands. I think the social in me is okay with that, accepts it as a sign of respect to some extent. Obviously, there's some nuances there, but the introvert in me is like, okay, I said hi to everyone. Back to my corner I go. I'm good for the rest of the time we're here. And not actually, but y'all know what I mean. That's sort of the idea behind a social introvert. All in all, I want to list 15 qualities of social introverts because maybe you might identify with one or the other. One, you're socially aware, you enjoy solitude. Social stimuli can leave you feeling distracted, meaning it's harder to make decisions or think straight when you're in a crowded environment or after you've been engaging so much. Like, I know, for example, for me, when I go to any kind of networking event or have even had a public speaking engagement, I need to relax. Even if I said to myself, okay, after this speaking engagement, after this networking event, I'm going to go to a coffee shop and do some work. I know myself and I know that I can't do that. I cannot be creative after being in a social environment, which is why I have to be so selective with what I do and how I show up and what spaces I want to be a part of. Number 4, you feel emotions deeply. You value independence. You value alone time. You learn by watching, aka my example of when I learned to dance by watching people's feet. We're great listeners. You like being social, especially with people you know and share interests with. You like to know things in advance. You like to prepare. Sometimes you just don't want to go out. Happens to me very often. But you have a little FOMO. Happens to me very often. You enjoy meeting new people, but on a time constraint. And what I'll say with this is, again, I have maybe about 2 or 3 hours in my day where I can be social. Matter of fact, probably in my week where I can be social. I love meeting new people. It's actually part of what I need to feel. I think it's part of my well being. But I will need some time to recover from it. Not that it's like a negative thing. I hope that we don't think that the word recovery that I'm using here means a negative thing because I sort of see it like running. I love running, and after a good, nice, long run, you still need to recover. And guess what? I want to do it again the next day. Like, you just need time to recover to show up as your best runner self, as your best introverted self, as your best social self. 14, you don't always like being the center of attention. If you are a social introvert, an introvert, any type of introvert, you know this. You know what I'm talking about. And yet, again, because sometimes we are in spaces that reward extroversion, we have to almost try to become comfortable with being the center of attention. Otherwise, we don't get heard. We get skipped over. 15, which I think will surprise some people, you're a great conversationalist. As a social introvert, we are social. We are social beings. Again, we just need some time afterwards. And at the end of the episode, I'm going to talk about how some of these show up for us as public speakers and why they are actually our strengths. So, an introvert who enjoys social interactions, obviously, is a social introvert, and it's recognizing the need that we have for regular and stimulating interactions with other people. And someone commented on a video I posted asking if I wouldn't be considered an ambivert instead. And I can see why that is. I can see why someone would think that. And for anyone that doesn't know, an ambivert, is a person whose personality has a balance of introverted and extroverted features. And I think the difference is Introverts will have clear and definite preferences. They will usually feel much more comfortable and at ease with people they know and with whom they've interacted with and spent time with in the past. So, what it comes down to is preference. I can have, quote, extroverted tendencies, or it would appear to be like that to outsiders, but I actually would rather just not be having the interaction at all. So, whereas an ambivert has the personalities of extroverted and introverted, there's those different features. And it's not about preference for them. It's just about what they need and who they already are, who they naturally are. As a social introvert, it's not that I can't be or appear to be extroverted, is that I would prefer not to. So the key word there is all around the preference. And sometimes, it's interesting because sometimes, again, I go back to in the spaces, and I mean more so in the professional spaces, especially as a public speaker, I have almost had to adopt what could be considered extroverted features because of the spaces that I've been in, because otherwise you're not as heard, because otherwise people think you're not thinking and people think you don't have an opinion or things to say. So I can see why social introversion and ambiversion, being an ambivert, could be mixed up together. But at the end of the day, it comes back down to preference. Not exactly, I wouldn't say how you show up, but more so what you prefer. Moving on to my favorite part of this episode, I think, is talking about how social introverts can show up as public speakers and what our strengths are. I was doing some additional research on social introverts, and while this is not a dating podcast at all, obviously, clearly, I hope that's clear, and I will be the last person to be able to give you great dating advice, seriously, I want to share what I read because, like I always do, we're going to connect it back to public speaking. All right, here goes. Therapist Ivinye Osibudo Onyali shares that, quote, when it comes to dating, social introverts will do well with both online dating and in-person dating. And because they do well in small groups, they can even try speed dating. Because introverts are very analytical, a social introvert should follow their intuition when they meet someone. They should focus on going to places they enjoy and skip the small talk. So here's what I think about. As a public speaker, go to and apply to the public speaking engagements that you actually enjoy. If you have to go to networking events, because networking is really how we may end up getting public speaking engagements, go to them, but choose the themes, choose the topics, choose the community and people that you enjoy being around. You're a social introvert, so that means you love people. You really do, and you love meeting new people, but it has to be the right crowd. No matter how tired a social interaction makes you, you will always go back for more. Como quien dice, nos encanta la mala vida. It's really what public speaking is like for me. I love it and I do it for a living, but will always need a self-care plan that involves deep solo time. And I'd like to quote an article that says, quote, in some ways, the social introvert is like the person who takes up skydiving, mountain climbing, bungee jumping, hang gliding, or car racing. They might get nervous before doing these things and feel relieved when it's all over. But the exhilaration they experience inspires them to return to the sky ledge, mountain, or cockpit again and again. And that's how it is for the social introvert. Depending on their personalities and preferences, they can gain tremendous enjoyment from socializing with close friends, cherished family members, interesting neighbors, fellow volunteers, community activists they admire, teachers of various types are fascinating characters with amazing stories to tell, end quote. And as a public speaker, I'd say that this is so true. Again, public speaking to me is the equivalent of skydiving. I have skydived before in the past as well. And it's so funny because people are always so shocked that that's what I chose. Matter of fact, when I went skydiving, my group of people were all introverts. All of my coworkers at the time, everybody was shocked that we chose it because we tend to be a little bit more reserved and quiet. And they just did not expect that we were going to choose skydiving as the activity. It's always pretty shocking to people, but I think it has a little bit to do with my social introversion, where I love trying new things. When I admire someone for the work that they do, or, volunteering for the causes that they really care about, being community activists, hearing your stories, that stuff, that gives me energy. it reignites my passions for what I do and for public speaking. And I think it's why I'm so good at public speaking and why I'm so passionate about public speaking education and talking about the intersections of being an introvert and public speaking. It's because at the end of the day, what connects me to the art are the people and the stories they tell and the passions that they have. That's really what public speaking is for me. And as a social introvert, it's so important for me to continue to have these human interactions all of the time with people. It not only helps in my creativity with how I talk about public speaking to you all, but it also helps me understand the diversity of public speakers that exist that much more. I don't ever want to be in a place where I feel like I know everything about public speaking or I know all the different types of public speakers and best practices. And constantly interacting with people is what keeps me up to date. It's what keeps me feeling creative. It's what keeps me feeling passionate and motivated to continue doing this. So this I think is super important. This quote that I just read is super important and something that makes social introverts pretty unique. And in that same vein of sometimes people don't expect that I seek the thrill or that I enjoy some of the activities that I do. For example, public speaking. People are like, "How are you an introvert and like public speaking?" And I will say that I sort of enjoy that people don't expect it from me. In my own way, my introversion keeps me safe from the social interactions and things I don't enjoy. And the social part makes me feel alive and adds excitement to my life. Like being an introvert is my safety net. When I don't want to be interacting or when I'm not vibing, that introversion kicks in. And then when I feel alive, when I feel passionate, that social part kicks in. And I will say this in that there's a lot of people in my life, even my closest friends, sometimes I won't talk about a lot of chats with Yvonne stuff, and I'm trying to get over that a little bit more, but I think it's because I've always assumed that people think, "Oh, she's an introvert, she's shy, she can't possibly show up in this way when it comes to public speaking." So I almost like to keep them thinking that so that it allows me the space that I need to fully explore myself within the art, if that makes sense. I don't know if anybody else can really relate to that, but my introversion keeps me in my bubble. It allows me to, when I need to, have that space to myself to think and to go inward without having that outside noise. And I think we're so used to having that outside noise everywhere else in the spaces that we're a part of. When I think about public speaking, it's like my home. It's the place that I go to go inward, to think deeply. And so, and to some extent, I think that a lot of me, and the reason why I too often keep my public speaking stuff and my personal stuff separate is because I like to have that for myself. I feel like in so many other spaces, we are interacting with one another, seeing people's or hearing people's opinions and good and bad, right? Like, I'm not talking about, oh, I like to stay away from negative opinions. Like my friends, my family, if I let them, they would be like my biggest advocates. You know, they are. But I don't share as much with them because again, it's just an introvert thing, I think. I like to keep things to myself and know that there is at least one thing that is just very much my own, even though I share so many things with you all, right? When I start to get creative with public speaking, with the content that I'll talk about, with the podcast, with anything, right? Or the speaking engagements I have coming up, that kind of stuff. I keep it to myself a lot and I'm working on it. I really am because I think just as much as I talk about public speaking, when I have these public speaking engagements, it's so important for you all to also see that I actually go out and do it. Like I get paid to speak and it's a thing that I do. It's what I do for a living. So it's important for me to also showcase that because I can't talk to you all about public speaking and just do that. I can't be the tips person and not say, "Hey, like I walk the walk also, so I do need to get a little better about that, but it's been nice to recognize and acknowledge and uplift the introverted part of myself because it's made my life make so much more sense. But I will say that being a social introvert public speaker has its perks. So I'm going to list, and by the way, I haven't even said this throughout the entirety of it, but I also think that I'm slightly a thinking introvert. And in the next couple of episodes, I'll go through that as well. But anyway, being a social introverted public speaker also has its perks. Towards the beginning of this podcast episode, I had mentioned that there were some qualities of social introverts that are actually really beneficial as public speakers that I'll talk about. So I want to go through 7 of them. The first one is you enjoy meeting new people on a time constraint. I sort of already talked about this one, but again, you really, as a public speaker, these social interactions is how I learn to communicate with you all. It's so important to know your audience or to know about the different types of audiences that exist out there. Even if I will never get in front of a stage and talk to you specifically, it's so important to me to get to know you and meet you because every single time that I learn about someone new, learn about their passions, I get to add that new perspective into how I show up as a speaker or even the things that I talk about so that if I ever am called upon to speak to you as an audience member, I know what angle can probably serve best. I know how to communicate more effectively because I enjoy meeting new people. Number 2, you don't always like being the center of attention. This one is an interesting one. Because as a public speaker, especially if you're the type of public speaker that speaks on stages, you are the center of attention. You kind of can't avoid that. You're literally up there, right? But something that I think has helped me is understanding that when I'm up there, when I'm on stage, it really doesn't even become about me. Like, yes, I am speaking. Technically, people are listening to me and all eyes are on me, which makes me hella nervous. But I am not the center of attention. The center of attention is the subject that I'm talking about. The center of attention is the content, the thinking that I have already done on the subject, the critical thinking, the message that I'm communicating. And so knowing that makes me feel more comfortable as a public speaker because I know that as an introvert, I've already looked inward. I already have thought about exactly what I'm going to say and how to best communicate it. And so it makes me feel good knowing that, yes, I'm the one on stage, but the center of attention are my thoughts, are the ideas that I'm communicating. Number 3, you are a great conversationalist. Y'all, I could talk for days, literally. And side note, I will also, for those awkward moments when I'm talking to people that I don't really know, aren't really vibing with, but I sort of have to, there's some networking events that you kind of have to vibe with the folks there, or kind of at least just have conversations with them. I do have a couple questions that I will pull up. Like I will prepare for networking events. Like, okay, I'm going to this. The theme is this, and most people probably are this. So let me get my questions going, right? And sometimes I overthink it, but I am a great conversationalist. I will keep a conversation going, and I think it's because I am also a great listener. So I will catch on to things that maybe someone else might not be able to, or someone else hasn't, because I catch on to, I think as a public speaker, especially in someone that teaches public speaking, I will catch on to the way that you say something, the social body language cues that you give me. Not that I'm a body language expert, but I will pick up on some of these things over time. You kind of learn a little bit, but I'll pick up on these things and I'll ask you questions that go beyond the superficial. And I think that makes incredible public speakers because, again, you're able to tap into something that most people wouldn't tap into, wouldn't know to, but you're able to because you think deeply. Number 4, sometimes you just don't want to go out, but you have a little FOMO. I can't tell you how many times, especially when it comes to networking events or even content creator events, where I'm like, I really just don't want to go to that because I'm not feeling my best energetic self. I'm not feeling social today, but I have a little FOMO. So, how does that help you as a public speaker? Well, there are going to be times where, as a public speaker, you just have to put yourself out there. You have to be in those rooms where decisions are being made, where partnerships are being made, because that is how we get more public speaking engagements and how we allow for our thought leadership to exist in the industry. So, as a social introvert, one, it is super important to, as an introvert in general, it's so important to understand your energy levels and where you are, but then also have a plan for how to pick yourself up and say, okay, No quiero hoy. I really do not want to today. And if I really don't want to, my body's like, no, you won't stay back, then I'm just going to stay home. But if there is even just 5% of me left, and this is going to give me a great opportunity, I got to get my butt up and go. Number 5, you feel emotions deeply. As an introvert, we go inward. And I think I have to double down here. And I'm also a Cancer, so I'm sure that plays a huge role in how I show up as well. But I feel everything deeply. And feeling is such a strength in public speaking, because when you feel things deeply, you're able to identify what things trigger those emotions and replicate that for your audience depending on what you're talking about. Stories are the number one way to do that. If you are able to feel emotions deeply, you're also able to evoke emotions deeply, and that is incredibly powerful. Don't let nobody else tell you that showing emotion or being emotional is weak, because it's really not. It's actually a huge strength in public speaking. Number 6, you like to know things in advance. Essentially, you like to be prepared. It doesn't matter if it's a social interaction, nothing like who's going to be there, how many people are going to be there, what are we doing? Like, what's the agenda? I like to know all those little details. And as a public speaker, it's super important to ask about those things. Am I going to have my tech set up? How is the audience laid out? Meaning, are they all in front of me? Am I in the middle, surrounded by a circle of audience members? How many people are in the room? Is it going to be 20? Is it going to be 200, 2,000, 5,000? I need to know all of these things so that I can better prepare my content and better prepare myself for being in the presence of that many people. Number 7, mentioned this one a little bit, but you're a great listener and enjoy solitude. And I think that makes you socially aware. As a public speaker, being socially aware is so important. It's tied into emotional intelligence. You are constantly having to look out into your audience and seeing how your message is resonating. You have to tweak what you say to fit your audience. So being a great listener and really enjoying your solitude allows for this social awareness that then is expressed in the way that you communicate to your audience. And honestly, I could go on and on and on. If you have questions or anything like that, I would love to talk about this a little bit more. I'm going to start dedicating more of my episodes on specific topics related to being an introverted public speaker, because it's such a huge thing and part of my platform and part of how I talk and teach public speaking. So with that being said, as always, thank you so much for joining and listening to this podcast episode. If you like this episode, consider sharing it with your amigas, fellow introverts, or community members. And if you would like to, or you have any thoughts, feel free to share your thoughts and tag me at Chats with Yvonne across platform. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego, everybody. Nos vemos a la próxima.